Good morning, everybody. My name is Peter McPherson. I chair the board of the Partnership to Cut Hunger and Poverty in Africa. We welcome you all here, and we, of course, particularly welcome our old friend Sir Gordon Conway, who had many years working in the field very substantively and directly on these kinds of problems. Held a number of important roles as longtime chair of the Rockefeller Foundation. And what his presence here today is about particularly is he has chaired a 10-person panel of the Montpelier panel. The new report that he will be talking about today, Growth and Resilience Opportunities in Africa Agriculture. Gordon, I won't go into your extensive background. You've heard it many times.
Yeah, it reads like an
but frankly, a particularly insightful person, and we're so happy to have you here again. Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you, Peter. It's a delight to be here, and many thanks to those who've organized it, to Michelle and her staff at the partnership. I'm delighted also that Julie Howard from USAID, accompanied by Kit, who's a new member of USAID. Julie, of course, has done a fantastic job working with Raj Shah on pushing forward the American commitments to food security, which of course everybody in the rest of the world is watching. And also to see David Beckman here, who in his own way has done such an enormous amount of I suppose lobbying is the right word, but at least persuading, arguing across the board to get the funding and the commitment that the US is providing in food security.
The right word.
And I'm sorry. No, it's fine. I'll just speak up.
There's a mic right there on the table.
No, I understand. No, is that is that a mic? Oh, it's a microphone as well. I just thought it was a. Yeah, okay, I'll do that. And as I understand it, the US has more or less met its L'Aquila commitment, and there's not many countries in the world that have done that. I run a program at Imperial College funded by Bill and Melinda Gates that in a sense is a sister to the Chicago Council's program, known as GADI. Our role is to try and persuade European governments in particular, but other donors, to do a better job of supporting agriculture in Africa. It's easily said, it's not so easily done. We focus very much on the UK, on France, Germany, and more recently on the European Commission, which is a major player. And we put together this little panel called the Montpelier panel, simply called that because we first met in Montpellier, of about a dozen leading European and African experts in agriculture. And this is our second report. And as you can see, the key to this is bringing growth and resilience together. And I'm just going to talk fairly quickly. Growth is good. Agricultural growth in Africa is good, and it's happening. Large numbers of African countries are growing at 5 or 6% per year. Some of that, of course, is due to mineral exploitation, oil, and so on, but a significant part is due to agricultural growth. And you've got about 10 countries that are on track to halve hunger by 2015. There are several opportunities here that present themselves. One, of course, is the CAADP process, which I guess most of you know about, getting African countries to sign up not only to spending 10% of budgets on agriculture, but also to providing strategic plans which organizations like USAID can build on, science, innovation and enabling environments, new science in Africa, which you can see, and of course the nexus of global level meetings. The G8 here at Camp David, the Rio Plus 20 meeting in Rio, the G20 meeting in Mexico City run by the Mexicans, and then of interest particularly to us in Britain is the G8 in 2013, which the British will be presiding over, and where we're hoping and we're lobbying hard for a major commitment on food security. These are the challenges. I don't need to go through them, but they're huge challenges that we face. The biggest challenge is to make sure that the growth produces enough food, is accessible, inclusive of the most vulnerable. And the point we're trying to make here is resilient, able to withstand stresses and shocks. There are enormous stresses and shocks in Africa. Pests, diseases and weeds like you wouldn't believe. Not many will remember, but these are the kinds of diseases that wiped out the wheat in the United States in the 1920s and 30s. They've got these terrible names: leaf streak virus, black sigatoga, for example, is another one. Striga, the weed striga. They're just as devastating for agriculture as is malaria, TB, and HIV for humans. So you've got those pests, diseases, and weeds, and of course, you have climate change. And the argument here is that you need resilience in the face of those stresses and shocks. Very simply, if you've got a growing agricultural development, along comes a pest, a disease, or a drought, what does the system then do? Can it withstand the stress or shock? Go on unperturbed? Or is it perturbed? Can it recover? Or is the collapse? That's what resilience is about. Climate change is increasingly a major problem in Africa now. If you go to any African village and say, is the climate changing? They say, of course. You say, how is it changing? And they tell you. And you say, what are you doing about it? And they tell you about that too. There are no climate change skeptics in Africa. It's a purely American and European problem. A lot of it is about drought. Not just the big droughts we read about, but the fact that the growing seasons are shortening. When I was in northern Ghana in November, the growing season was short because the rains arrived a month late and finished a month early. There was barely enough days to harvest a crop of rice, and only one or two varieties could do it. And then the other point is that temperatures are great. Temperatures greater than 30 degrees. And you can see here, just look at the red line down the bottom there. That is the impact on yield of high temperatures. Each day, each degree day spent above 30 degrees reduces the final yield by 1% under optimal conditions, but by nearly 2% under drought conditions. So you've got a double whammy here. You've got heat and you've got drought coming together. And those are going to dominate much of Africa in the years ahead. And so we come up with this notion of growth with resilience. It's not particularly new. Words have been around for a long time, but we've tried to put them together in this way. Tried to make the point that resilience is not an add-on to growth. You've got to build resilience in right at the beginning with every program, project, and strategy. And we've come up with a basket of 3 components: resilient markets, resilient agriculture, resilient people. And you can see those in detail in the reports, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, just to introduce you to the ideas. Resilient markets is one. We talked about that in our first report. The French G20 came up with this agricultural market information system, and that's going to be refined, we hope, at the next G20. That is important. We need to know exactly where all the grain is being stored. Particularly, we need to know what the Chinese and the Indians are storing. The more open that information is, the less volatility we'll have. We also think this year that we need a big push on regional trade in staple crops. The more open countries in Africa are to trading between each other on staple crops, the less likely are we going to get volatility. But then the other point is that we need to produce more food. The more food we produce, the less likely are we going to get volatility. And that it depends on private investment, and in particular on creating enabling environments. It's a sort of, enabling environment is one of those slightly arcane economics terms. I've got more and more fascinated by seeing it on the ground, and this is one way you can see it on the ground. See the couple up in the middle there? They're actually in Zambia. It's a couple who are doing conservation farming. It's a typical African farm. On the right are members of their farm association. So they're part of a farm association. It can be a cooperative, it can be a contract group, all kinds of ways, but they're part of that. Bottom right, that's where they get their inputs, from an agro dealer. Small shop in a local village or town that sells seed, particularly certified seed. The trick is certified seed, not any old rubbish, but good certified seed. And fertilizers. And then the top left there is a little co-op in the village where they store their grain, collectively bring the grain in, store it, and then sell it. And they sell it using the mobile phone down at the bottom there. Throughout Africa, the mobile phone is the most extraordinary innovation in African hands. As you know, they pioneered mobile phone banking. It's everywhere in East Africa. Nearly everybody in the country is using mobile phone banking. We're thinking of introducing it in Britain, but we don't quite know how to do it. Just one quick anecdote. I was up in northern Ghana, traveled to Yendi. I went up to the Togo border along a very difficult road. Finally got there to the border to visit a village. And I thought, I'll call my wife. And I picked on the phone and put a number in. Boom! She answered it. She said, oh, where are you? I said, I'm up on the Togo border. I said, where are you? She said, I'm on the border between Thailand and the Shan states of Burma, and I'm just about to go across because she works with the Shan in Burma, so I won't be in contact for the next few days. That was, I mean, I know for most of the younger generation that's not remarkable, but I found it really remarkable. I could call from the borders of Togo to the borders of the Shan states just like that. And of course the infrastructure is there on the bottom left, a road and a tower, a microwave tower. And you can put these together, you can put these together in this way. Farm household in the middle, surrounded by its community, agro dealers out here, local seed companies, many new local seed companies in Africa producing certified seed, local fertilizer companies beginning, banks down here providing microcredit. Banks, of course, have got tons of money in Africa. Just get their hands on it. And over on the left, local traders who will buy the grain at a reasonable price and sell it on national and regional. And all of it connected in two ways. Connected by roads, connected by ICT of various kinds, including mobile phones. That's what a good enabling environment is about. It's always been thought of as the province of the public sector, that the public sector has to provide that. But actually, what we really need is more public-private partnerships to create these enabling environments. Resilient agriculture. A buzzword here, which I think is very important, is sustainable intensification. I know it's becoming important in the US, it's important in Britain too. And I think you can talk about it in very simple terms. It's about getting more for less on a durable basis. I know people would say, well, you can't do that. The world isn't that way. But actually the world is that way, if you're really smart. It means more food or agricultural products with less pesticide, less fertilizer, less water, and less outputs of greenhouse gases. Microdosing, using a Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola or other kind of soda cap to put your fertilizer in the soil, in the hole where you plant the grain. And those two farmers I showed you earlier are doing that. They're putting a bit of manure in there too. Much more efficient about how you use fertilizer. It's precision farming. But also, sustainable intensification, building resilience depends upon modern plant breeding. Classic example are the Nericas, the cross between Asian and African rice, being produced by Monty Jones, the great Sierra Leonean agriculturalist. This is Uganda. Most Asians look at that picture and say, what are those Africans doing in the Thai or Korean rice field? I say, that's not a Thai rice field, that's an African rice field. And Uganda is now exporting quite large amounts of these Nerica rices, because they're very high quality, to Kenya. And of course, where appropriate, use of genetic engineering, recombinant DNA, molecular breeding. I was in Uganda last week and saw the work that's being done on this wilt, this disease that's spreading rapidly throughout Uganda, causing millions of dollars of loss. Ugandans, as you all know, eat bananas as a staple. It's not a dessert, it's a staple that they make into a kind of sort of porridgey thing. And you can see the devastation that's caused. They're using a couple of genes from a sweet potato provided by Academia Sinica, the Taiwanese academy. They've successfully transferred it to bananas in Uganda, and I saw the field trials that are now going on. It's interesting, of course, because this is all public money. This is not the big multinational companies. This is Ugandan money and money that's been provided from a number of public sources like USAID and the British government and elsewhere. Where appropriate, this is where I think many Africans are going to go. And what is important about these approaches is that in addition to modern breeding, there's a big role for what's called agroecology, for using ecological processes to produce more resilient crops. And this is quite remarkable. Many of you may have seen it before. These trees are called Phaidherbia. It used to be an acacia, but they've changed the name. Trees haven't changed the name. The trees have the remarkable property that they shed their leaves in the wet season. So, as you can see, there's no leaves to shade the maize underneath. They're leguminous trees, so the soil is fertile, and you can get 3 tons of maize, and over the years it goes up to 3, 4, even 5 tons of maize under those trees without fertilizer. But the extra is that they will fix 2 to 4 tons of carbon into the soil per hectare per year. This is real sustainable intensification on into the future. Finally, resilient people. I'll just say something about scaling up nutrition, because that's an area that you know very well because of the US leadership on what's called the SUN Initiative and the 1,000-Day Initiative. We have to keep remembering that we've got this appalling problem of 1 in 5 children under 5 being stunted. Children who are stunted grow up stunted, women who are stunted a child grow up as stunted women and have stunted babies. It's a terrible issue. We know what to do about it. There are a lot of particularly well-established medical interventions. But another part of it is to use biofortification. One of the problems we've got is that the staple crops that we eat are great on carbohydrate, pretty good often on protein, but they're hopeless on micronutrients. And this I saw last week, and I don't think anybody will have seen some of these pictures now. This is in Uganda. Another piece of research where they're growing golden bananas. The same gene that is being used in golden rice. And you can see they're golden because the leaves are golden. And this is crucial because bananas are such a staple part of the Ugandan diet, particularly for children as they come out of weaning. So that's what the report is about. All those different things, I just illustrated it with a few examples. The report, when you read it, you'll see much more. The final point one has to make is the importance of governance and political leadership. The classic example is John Kuffour, the former president of Ghana, who at the World Food Prize, we gave the prize with him and Lula da Silva in 2011. When he left office, Ghana was growing at 8.5% per year. It's now growing at over 13%, but that's largely because of the oil that's been discovered. But half of that 8% was due to growth in agriculture. And it was something that he really took a strong lead on. So a place where the enabling environments were created through government action and partnership with the private sector. That kind of leadership is crucial. But also, of course, leadership in the West, among the donor countries. The leadership here in the United States has been given by President Obama and by Hillary Clinton and by Rajiv Shah and her colleagues. In Britain, the leadership that we're seeing coming through with Andrew Mitchell, who's the Secretary of State for International Development. And we're now seeing this in the European Commission, major leadership under Piebalgs, the Commissioner for Development. And we're hoping that as a result of the French elections, we'll see leadership coming out of the new French president. And a great deal coming, very advanced thinking from Germany. So that's in brief report, and I'm be delighted to hear the comments of my fellow panelists. I put that up there. Those of you who haven't got a copy of the report, if you go into the Ag4Impact website, you can download it. I'm sorry I could only bring over a small number. Those are the members of the panel, people, many of whom you will know. Joachim van Braun, of course, in particular, Luis Fresco from the Netherlands, Namango Ngongi there, the president just stepped down from AGRA. I presented the report in DFID and also at the European Commission in Brussels, and last week I presented it in Nairobi to an audience like this, and now we're here in the US. Thank you. I'll bring another microphone.
They pick up on, oh, we have some here.
No, but I'll bring one.
You got, okay. Great. Thank you very much, Gordon. I'm Michelle McNabb from the Partnership to Cut Hunger and Poverty in Africa, and I'd like to second Peter's welcome to everyone for coming this morning. It's a great opportunity to hear Gordon, and thank you so much for presenting that. We really want to get to some dialogue with Gordon, but first wanted to hear a few words from a couple of panelists, reaction to what Gordon has presented in the report, what he's presented today, and then we'll open it up for discussion after that. We have one slight issue that Kit Batten, who's here for the Global Climate Change Advisor from USAID, has to leave no later than 11 o'clock meeting. So we want to give her an opportunity to say a few words first. And then Julie Howard, the Chief Scientist from the Food Security Bureau, will give a few remarks. And finally, David Beckman, a little bit about the perspectives from the U.S. on some of the issues that Gordon has talked about. And then we'll open up for questions here in hopefully about 5 minutes each for the responses and issues that were raised in Gordon's report. So, Kit, do you want to go ahead and start?
Great, thank you. And it's on?
Should be.
Okay, thank you. And I do apologize, I can't stay for more of the discussion, but you're in excellent hands here with the rest of the panelists up here, and in addition, our colleague Chris Kosnick from USAID, who is the Acting Office Director for the new Office of Land Tenure and Resource Management in the newly renamed Bureau for Economic Growth, Education, and the Environment, the old EGAT, is here to answer questions as well. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel this morning and to have read the very excellent report. I think that in response, many of the things that USAID is trying to do in terms of integrating our work, I'm the climate change coordinator, so that's my primary focus, but working with food security and the efforts that you've taken with this report to integrate trade, markets, and nutrition, in addition to those elements, is essential to really having a prescription for success moving forward. I think that I'll just try and keep my remarks relatively short to give you a little bit of a sense of what we're doing at USAID in this context from a climate change lens. Many of you may know that we just released our climate change and development strategy in January of this year. The strategy makes clear an overarching goal that, again, links with the sustainable economic growth. It needs to be sustainable from the get-go of climate resilient, low emission, sustainable development. So working in both the adaptation and the mitigation elements of climate change. Underlying that overarching goal are three different equally important strategic objectives, one of which focuses on mitigation, so reducing emissions by investing in clean energy and sustainable land management practices. One focuses on adaptation, increasing the resilience of people, places, and livelihoods. And the final one is about integration, ensuring that we're integrating opportunities to adapt to climate change and then opportunities to reduce emissions in all of the work that we do across USAID's development portfolio. So in food security, in health, in democracy and governance, in gender, water, the whole USAID Forward initiative, et cetera. As one example of what we're doing on the cusp of integrating food security and climate change, we sent out a request for proposals for missions a few months ago to look at how they'd like to start to integrate climate change adaptation and mitigation across their portfolio. A lot of folks for a long time have been working on different elements of climate change at the agency. This is not to say that this new strategy now suddenly means that USAID is working on climate change. We've been doing it for a while, but it's focusing and concentrating the way in which we work on climate change. As a result of this call for proposals, we got over 50 proposals back, and we're able to fund 7. The 2 that we funded that integrate climate change and food security work, one of which is in Bangladesh, where we're examining how, and this is a big Feed the Future country, examining how deep fertilizer placement can help contribute to food security and also reduce emissions of nitrous oxide into the environment. In Kazakhstan, we're looking at a food shed approach. Kazakhstan produces a lot of the agricultural products for the whole Central Asian Republic region. And as climate is changing, especially wheat production is projected to change and be impacted by those changes in climate. So what does that mean for food security for the entire area? So looking at that intersection of food security and climate change adaptation. And key to all of this is a real commitment to new monitoring and evaluation tools. It's really difficult to, as we're describing what adaptation is, it can mean so many different things, but coming up with standard metrics for adaptation is a challenge, but by no means just because it's hard, we're not going to do it. We really need to be investing in this way. So we're expending significant financial and time resources to help develop monitoring and evaluation to really be able to track what we're doing. Additionally, the U.S. government, Julie and I were both at the UNFCCC negotiations in Durban, South Africa last year, and we've been working on increasing food security into those climate change discussions. What we did for the first time was to agree to a separate process for the consideration of mitigation and adaptation in the agriculture sector as part of the UNFCCC negotiations, and the text calls upon COP18, which is the Convention of the Parties under the UNFCCC that will take place in Doha this December, to take a decision on mitigation and adaptation in agriculture. So that's one way to be integrating agriculture into a very significant global process. I have a number of different examples, but I don't want to take up too much time. Okay. We are working specifically in Africa, since that's what we're focused on here. We are working on increasing, as I mentioned, the adaptation objective is in our strategy. We're working on making sure that more information is available to all sorts of different audiences, so that they can use this climate change information in their decision-making process. And that information is not going to be the same for a farmer as for a policymaker. So what we're doing is that as rainfall is becoming less predictable and more variable, we're working to provide accurate climate change information to farmers and decision makers across Africa. And a key challenge is to understanding what types of information are most relevant to these different audiences, because the types of information are going to vary from geographic location to location and vary from audience to audience. So our Famine Early Warning System Networks, or FuseNet program, has a rich history of providing timely and detailed early warning and vulnerability information in terms of food security situations. So we're building on that, and we're also using our SERVIR program, which is a collaboration with NASA in East Africa, to integrate Earth observations like satellite imagery and in-situ data and forecast models in order to better inform decisions about how to manage ecosystems and other natural resources in a changing climate towards the goal of food security. One example of what we're doing is we're also trying to assess existing programs on the ground to see why they're working, why they might not be working, and better, again, with this monitoring and evaluation component. So there is a program called Meteo Mali, or the Mali Meteorological Service, that links weather forecast and climate change data with agroecological information, as you were mentioning earlier, to advise farmers throughout Mali on when to plant crops and which crops to plant for maximum yield. This Meteo Mali program claims to have increased yields by 25 to 35% in the south of Mali and by up to 60% in northern Mali. So what USAID is doing is we're working to assess the success of this program. If these programs are as effective as they claim, and if so, what elements make them so successful, and then whether or not they can be scaled up and successfully implemented in other countries. So we're looking at the scientific information and methodologies employed by the Mali Meteorological Service, the institutional arrangements that help provide this information to the farmers, and then also looking at a field survey of livelihood information in 36 different villages, those both who are currently provided with this type of information and those that are not currently provided with this information. So we'll be looking for results as a result of this assessment to improve the work that we're doing in terms of providing timely information so that farmers can adapt to a changing climate. We're also working on a number of vulnerability assessments. One quick example, in Uganda, we're focusing again on the agriculture sector, looking at crop and value chain vulnerabilities. How we're working on this is to focus on two different levels, both a national scale crop-based vulnerability assessment, a livelihood assessment in key sectors, and then also looking at an option analysis to really determine which types of adaptation actions are successful and which ones are not. So we're looking at 10 different crops in both the short and the long term, reviewing vulnerabilities all along the value chain, particularly looking at vulnerabilities in the transportation section of the value chain, and then doing an economic assessment of these different vulnerabilities. In terms of livelihoods, looking at differential impact of climate change on different populations. We're talking about the different vulnerable populations and how it's important to be thinking about those as well. So women, poor households, richer households, and what types of information has influenced behavior changes where they have occurred. This all, of course, also links into our work with the Horn of Africa, working closely with the African Union, with CAADP and other donors to address this recurrence of the drought cycle in the Horn of Africa and food insecurity. Thanks to our investments in humanitarian assistance, we were able to save hundreds of thousands of lives in Somalia alone in the last year, during this devastating drought that led to famine and threw over 13 million people into crisis. In fact, it was our FuseNet program, which I mentioned before, which provided us with a lot of information in advance of this crisis, letting us know that this was pending so that we could respond with some of our resilience measurements in advance and then rapidly respond as the crisis continued to unfold. Our agricultural investments are supporting the goal of lifting 18 million people from a state of hunger and poverty, allowing 7.5 million people to withstand the drought without seeking emergency aid. And then, to conclude, as our administrator, Raj Shah, said last month, although in Nairobi, although the region will remain prone to drought, and that vulnerability may only increase as a result of climate change, the simple truth is that we should be doing more to prevent these crises in the first place. We want the countries and communities of the region to have the capacity to weather and then bounce back from any future shocks. While we can't prevent drought, we can prevent food crises. So I think that quote very adequately gets right to the point of the Montpelier report in terms of being able to link all of these things together and pick where we can truly have influences in the food security arena. So with that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kit. I think I'll just take a little bit of a break here, knowing that Kit has to leave in a few minutes. And if there are any burning questions specifically related to what Kit mentioned in the U.S. government's climate change and integration with food security issues, or questions to Gordon that might be relevant to what Kit has just presented, let's take a quick pause. Does anybody have a question that specifically they'd like to address before Kit leaves on climate change issues? There's one here. We'll take one or two, and then we'll go to Julie.
I'm Anne Marie Stroh, and I work for USDA, the branch that interfaces with the land-grant universities. And we're starting to work with other agencies in USDA and USAID in curriculum development for secondary schools and secondary schools. And I'm wondering if we should be contacting our aid colleagues in the embassy there to talk about incorporating sustainability, climate change sustainability into that curriculum.
I think that's an excellent idea. Certainly, we see stronger storms happening in that region that are linked with climate change. I think that also, just to let you know, as a result of having released this strategy, we're working with all of the missions around the world, whether or not they receive direct funding. We have 3 different kinds of direct funding in the Climate Change Initiative: clean energy money, sustainable landscapes, which essentially means REDD Plus for the meantime, starting in fiscal year 13. REDD Plus is reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, moving in 2013 into additional ecosystem types, including agriculture, wetlands, grasslands, so not just forest lands, although they continue to be important carbon sinks, and then adaptation. But what we're working with all missions to do through their country development cooperation strategies is to answer a series of questions, even if they don't receive direct climate change funding, about what climate change impacts are already occurring in the countries in which they're working, what types of activities they're currently undertaking, and what's the vulnerability of those activities to a changing climate, and then also looking at opportunities to reduce emissions through the missions activities. And so we're working to guide them on that. And certainly education is a critical component when we're trying to reach out. We're not just trying to reach our mission practitioners in terms of being able to work with developing country partner governments on adaptation and mitigation. We really also want to be developing much more broad public outreach campaigns too, to educate about climate change. One of the projects I mentioned, the 7 pilot projects that we are currently funding in Benin. Our project there is an adaptation project that works on education and health integration with climate change adaptation. So that's one example of a similar type of idea, but certainly would be supportive of reaching out to Haiti in that way.
Great, thanks for that. One more question here, and then.
Charlotte Ketterbrand from IPC.
A good question. We at IPC welcome the decision to look at agriculture in the context of the climate change negotiations. Could you give us a sense of the politics and the likely things that are going to have to be decided by the next COP? I mean, it's one thing to say we'll consider agriculture, but it's another thing to then jump from that to say what exactly are we wanting to do, and what are some of the discussions taking place around that?
So I can only speak to this from a relatively high level because I'm not personally involved in these negotiations with respect to incorporating agriculture into the COP. These things do take long. They take a while, and this is the first time that agriculture has been specifically called out in the context of the UNFCCC. There are many different interests that are trying to get additional types of ecosystems. For example, the whole blue carbon. If you're familiar with blue carbon, there's a push to try and get that taken as an additional kind of path within the UNFCCC negotiations as well. So in terms of exact timeline and expectations for what will happen in the next COP, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that, but it is something that we are paying increasing attention to. The presence of Julie and other USAID food security experts at the negotiations, the presence of USDA at the negotiations, et cetera, to try and raise this in significance. I think it's an indication of the level of importance that we see here, but yes, it's a long process. So I'll be eagerly looking towards what happens in Doha as well.
Thanks, Kit. Let me let Gordon have one quick word, and then know that Kit has to run out.
Well, I just really want to say, first of all, I think what you're doing, Kit, is very impressive. I mean, this range of activities. And what I hope is that we can get this linked to the activities, for example, by the climate change people in DFID, who are also linking to agriculture. Just picking up one topic, and that is the one of monitoring. It is important to recognize just how important developing country agriculture is as a potential mitigator. If all the carbon went back into the soil that's been taken out since 1945, we would reduce the carbon dioxide equivalents in the atmosphere by 100 parts per million. That's huge, absolutely huge. And you could do that through agriculture. But the problem is, of course, these are millions of smallholders. And we know how to reduce nitrous oxide and methane emissions in agriculture. We know how to put carbon back in agriculture on a small scale. What we don't know is how to do it on a large scale and make sure the farmers are rewarded. Now, one thing I saw in Kenya last week at the World Agroforestry Center, they've just set up a new soil analysis laboratory for Africa, which has no water in it. Right? There's no wet labs. All those labs with all those reagents and determinants, all the rest that you may remember, they're gone. They've got 4 machines using various forms of light wave from infrared and others, which do the complete analysis. You can do a complete analysis of a set of soils in an hour. Everything, not just NPK, but all the elements. And there is now, they've just got a new machine which is handheld, and you can literally point it at the soil and it'll tell you what's there. Well, this is complete revolution. And so if you could do that, if you could go into an area and measure the amount of carbon in the soil and go back 2, 3, 4, 5 years later and measure the soil, you've then got a basis for rewarding the farmers for what they've done. And that's going to be the trick. And then I think people may take notice. At the moment, they just say agriculture. Oh, you know, agriculture is so complicated. Let's forget it. No.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Kit.
Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry I have to run off. Thank you.
So go ahead and let Julie Howard have a few words.
So, well, before Kit leaves, I just want to say thanks, Kit, for coming. I still feel, even after a little more than a year, relatively new to government, but one of the real joys of working in USAID and working with Feed the Future is realizing that we have an increasingly deep bench on agriculture, on climate change, on food security issues. And it's part of my job to make sure that we're connecting with all of those folks. So it's a real pleasure to work with Kit and Chris and their team as we work out what sustainable what sustainability really means. So I was really happy that Kit agreed to come and speak with us this morning. But I just have a few things to say. First of all, thank you, Sir Gordon, and thanks to the Montpellier Group for this important and very, very timely report. I want to talk a little bit about the recommendations. We, I think, very strongly support many of the recommendations. I mean, certainly the 4 big areas resonate very, very strongly with the Feed the Future approach. And I think I see so many familiar faces around the room. I think there's really no need for me to walk through the Feed the Future outline, but instead just focus a little bit on those recommendations from the report and what we see as some of the main challenges going forward. But I would be remiss also in saying that, as Gordon and Kit both pointed out, I mean, we've witnessed a real sea change in the intentions of food security over the past 5 years, and that's really due to the efforts of many of you. And I want to say that the fight's not over yet. I mean, we continue to need your support and your guidance going forward, but I want to say thank you to all of you for that, for your continued help in this area. Well, as I said, we very much like the flow of the recommendations, resilient markets, resilient agriculture, resilient people, political leadership just resonates incredibly with the Feed the Future initiative. Just going through sort of recommendation area by recommendation area, I just want to make a few comments on resilient markets. I mean, we couldn't agree more on the imperative of stimulating private sector investment. And you'll be hearing a lot from us on that topic over the next few weeks. I think even in the most optimistic scenarios, we're hoping for an expansion, continued expansion of ODA for sustainable agriculture, for food security and nutrition. But realistically, we know that really our game is spending the levels that we have more effectively and really making that ODA count to create a better enabling environment for the right kind of private sector investment, the kind of private sector investment that really reaches smallholders, especially women and youth, and lifts them from poverty. So smarter use of ODA, keep pressing for increased levels, but realizing that increasingly the game shifts to really attracting in private sector investment, not just foreign direct investment, but also building up the capacity of local companies, because that's really the key to sustainable development. The key is creating jobs in local economies. So we're very, very focused on that as well. And many of you will know, I mean, we focused quite heavily on public-private partnerships, on building those and Feed the Future. In the markets area, several notable examples, big partnership with PepsiCo in Ethiopia and the World Food Program around chickpea processing. Chickpeas both for nutritious feeding food, a supplementary feeding food, but sort of looking towards the future, as this might be a food that's marketed regionally for general consumption. We've seen partnerships with Walmart as well as CRS, Catholic Relief Services, as well as Mercy Corps in Central America. I was really pleased to be on a panel at the Food Aid conference last year in Kansas City speaking about that, and it's really a fascinating story of this great partnership between NGOs and Walmart, I mean, to build capacity among farmer organizations to organize themselves, to really figure out what quality standards they need to meet, and to be able to bargain better, essentially, so they get the best possible price. So really quite very interesting. But really now we need to put those efforts on steroids, I would say. And to do that, I know in the report it talks a little bit about the Grow Africa approach, and this is essentially what we're thinking. This is an African Union, a CAADP program supported by the World Economic Forum, essentially to create investment forums in each country and really figure out what will it take to create this enabling environment and to bring major private sector investment in, the right kind of investment that strengthens local capacity. So on the key challenges here, I think we really have to recognize the policy environment, the enabling environment. How do we address that? I was in a conversation yesterday where we talked, there's a lot of discussion nowadays about land tenure, about land grabbing, and I think, you scarcely can't think about private sector investment without wondering in the same breath, both how do you create the enabling environment as well as make sure that there's a transparency around, how that investment is taking place. Can't do any of that really without making some fairly major progress on land tenure. And that's a big lift. That's a really big lift for governments, for donors. So you'll hear me say a couple more times that, really getting to sort of a short list of key policy priorities. I would put land tenure on that, but it's really most important. It's what countries are putting on their short list. They're also putting on sort of market, sort of regional trade, as well as standards and qualities, taxing mechanisms. So those kinds of things, working with countries, being guided by countries like the country investment programs, sort of whittling through, what are the main policy priorities, and then getting donors, to also sign off on these are the things that we're going to see through, to really see progress on. So that's what I would say on resilient markets. On resilient agriculture, so I could talk a full hour on this, but I won't, I promise, Michelle. I'm quite proud, as the chief scientist of the Bureau of Food Security, that we're really placing sustainable intensification in all the ways that Gordon talked about, sorry, Sir Gordon, talked about at the center of our research strategy. And I was able to travel in Ghana and in Tanzania, and colleagues were in Ethiopia earlier this year to launch our research efforts in 3 major areas of Africa, which we feel have great agricultural potential, but also have great levels of, serious levels of poverty and undernutrition. So just as Gordon described, sustainable intensification is really producing more from the same area of land while reducing the negative environmental impacts, using both socially appropriate and economically viable methods. So, well, what does all that mean? I really see it very pragmatically as how does U.S. With partners, and increasingly we're working with the Australians, we're working with DFID on this, we're working with the CG system, most of all we're working with the National Agricultural Research Systems. How do we get everybody in the same room and say, okay, if we focus on, say, the Sudano-Sahelian system of northern Ghana and southern Mali, what are the key constraints for this agro-ecosystem, including livestock, including key methods of off-farm income? How do we work together on this set of priorities in an adaptive sense? So how do we draw from our store of technology on the shelf? How do we see how it functions at the farmer's level in the system? How do we track that? And how do we get it out? How do we scale access to these technologies, all while understanding how it's working at the farmer's level and how it's working at the landscape level? I think that's the innovation, and that's what we're so pleased to be working with Kit and Chris and colleagues and other colleagues as well from the National Ag Research Systems and from the CG Center. So I really think half of the game is defragmenting our efforts, and really pulling it all together in sort of a single ecosystem with a natural resource lens as well. Okay, a couple of other points on resilient agriculture. Sir Gordon mentioned the importance of biotech. We're investing in this area as well. We see a lot of promise for biotechnology in addressing disease issues, but also addressing heat and water stress issues, and also addressing making plants more efficient in their use of key nutrients like nitrogen, so we can actually reduce our use of nitrogen. So, okay, again, the key challenge here is, how do we coordinate around a pretty focused agenda? And again, we come back to the accountability question, the monitoring and accountability question. Okay, resilient people. I have a strong sense that David's going to talk a lot about nutrition. So I'll just say a few things about nutrition. We also agree that biofortification is very important, and we're starting to see uptake of biofortified crops in places like South Asia. Some of the zinc cereals, zinc-enriched cereals are starting to take off, as well as the vitamin A-enriched sweet potato and other things in Africa. I was recently in Guatemala, and aside from having to dust off my 30-year-old Spanish, which was a little traumatic, it was actually very, very interesting to see Guatemala as an example where the Feed the Future approach is starting to bear results. This is an area where state and USAID and USDA and CDC and Peace Corps are co-investing, are co-locating personnel, are co-locating projects, essentially all in specific areas of the Western Highlands of Guatemala. And it's starting to pay off also because of the political will element. The new government is essentially, in the first 3 months of its office, said, first of all, this rate of stunting of malnutrition in the Western Highlands, which is one of the highest in the world, is unacceptable. And this is going to be a key priority for us. So the government has made this a priority. They've actually adopted the research and analysis from the previous administration and said, we're not going to redo this. We believe all this. We're going to move forward very quickly to put plans and projects into place. Very, very interesting to see how our humanitarian projects, our food for work projects, our supplementary feeding projects are then working hand in hand with nutrition education projects, and with our value chain projects. So you sort of see, we're meeting the needs of the childbearing age women, as well as young children, sort of meeting that immediately through supplementary feeding, while really attacking, I think the fundamental problem here is even more than income is education. So really harnessing the lessons from many, many years of sort of what we learned about how to change sort of ingrained cultural practices, in this case, real reliance on maize, which is not, you're missing so many nutrients from that. So quite interesting to see all that play out, and very interesting for me from the Feed the Future perspective to see such excitement around the room of these different agency partners as they see all that they are able to contribute to this one effort, and how they're also engaging the government and engaging other donors. So really, really pleased about that. The challenge in this area, I think, is resilient people. You need capacity development. So at all different levels. I won't dwell on that, but essentially, the network of universities, the network of polytechnics for agriculture and nutrition, quite thin in many of these areas. And finally, just to say, political leadership, just to support that. Essentially, yes, Ghana, other countries have shown very strong leadership. I wanted to end, though, by saying, Sir Gordon, we need the Montpellier Group and others, I think, to help us get to a level of political leadership in the donor community as well. I think we're coming to a turning point now where we realize it is about resources, but not just about resources. It is about, again, this problem of defragmenting our programs and projects. So how do we come together at the individual country level and, guided by the country priorities, say, this is our short list of policy priorities. This is our short list, the country's short list of key technologies to get out. This is our short list of key. And the donors then very, very methodically commit themselves to refashioning their programs to meet that common list of priorities. And I think the next step in is how do we hold ourselves accountable. I think we haven't arrived at that, in the CADP process yet, or in the L'Aquila process. We've succeeded in tracking our increased resources flowing in this area, but we haven't done well enough yet in saying, have we really spent those against the country priorities, and what results have we got from that process? So to us, that is really the Mount Everest, the Mount Rainier the challenge for us all going forward. How do we get there together? And really, it starts at the country level, involving the donor community, led by the country, involving the private sector. Let me stop there.
Great. Thank you. Thanks very much, Julie. I think that's a great transition. The order of our panel, I think, is highly appropriate today. I'm really impressed that we've really looked at the linkages between science and technology and agriculture, climate change, and health and nutrition is brought out. So I think it's ideal to turn over to David to talk a little bit about the policy and advocacy side of the equation.
What I'd like to do is talk about 4 political processes that are happening right now, through which the people in this room can help to implement some of the ideas in the report. I really appreciate Michelle, the partnership, for your continuing leadership, and I thought the report was really good. It's worth reading. This is Global Agricultural Development 2.1. It really, it was actually, it sort of goes beyond. We've managed now to see agricultural growth in a lot of poor countries for a few years. But then this talks about, well, how do you make that sustainable? And that focus leads to a way of thinking about the problem that struck me as, in some ways, really fresh. The first political process that's coming up on which we can have an influence is the G8 summit. From what it seems like, this G8 summit is not going to give much time to international development. International development will probably be an hour, maybe 90 minutes of the day when the heads of government meet. But that hour will be spent talking about food security. President Obama will push the rest of the G8 to meet the L'Aquila commitments. He'll push for measures to facilitate the involvement of the private sector in agriculture. And at least at the level of the communique, there'll be a reaffirmation of moving together to scale up nutrition, which is, that's based on new knowledge about how we can reduce child nutrition. And part of that is nutrition-sensitive agriculture, and then in addition, you focus on babies and pregnant women and do some things. The highest impact investment is actually information. As you were saying, things about diet, also teaching low-income parents about the power of washing hands with soap. So it's exciting to me that I think President Obama sees food as how he wants to be remembered in the area of international development, and it will be a significant focus at the G8. It is still wobbly trying to get the defragmentation, even in the messaging of the administration. And then we as a community are also somewhat fragmented, especially between people who care about agriculture and people who care about nutrition. So in the days just before the G8 summit, there will be 2 meetings. On Friday, May 18th, the Chicago Council is convening a meeting on agriculture. I would guess all of us are going to be at that. On Thursday, May 17th, Bread for the World and Interaction and Save the Children and other groups are convening a meeting on scaling up nutrition. We screwed up. We should not have had 2 meetings. This is not good. We will lose if these meetings are not seen as 2 sides of the same coin. And so actually Raj helped to get the groups together to think about how do we message in a way to make it clear that agriculture is important to nutrition. And then as the report says, nutrition is important to agriculture. If you have undernourished people, they're not going to be energetic or creative farmers. So it does not make sense that you have competing messages. And then in terms of just sort of getting the money, keeping the momentum going, it's partly about celebrating the Global Food Security Initiative, the President's leadership on the Global Food Security Initiative. If we break up into the little fragments, we will lose. So what we can do is make sure that there's an alignment of messaging. There can be different focuses on the 2 days, but the nutrition meeting needs to affirm the importance of Feed the Future. And the agriculture meeting needs to affirm scaling up nutrition. There needs to be some overlap in the attendance at those two meetings. There's been talk that the administration may host a reception in the State Department on the evening of the 17th, where you'll invite the nutrition and the agriculture people to kind of mingle. Wouldn't that be interesting? So we can do this. We need to defragment these communities because they are clearly interrelated, as the report points out, so that we get a coherent message, especially as it goes out to the media, to members of Congress. It needs to be one message about, the way I would say, is support for what the Obama administration has been doing to provide leadership for global food security. So that's the first process. Second process is the House budget process. The House budget proposes deep cuts in virtually all non-military spending, with 2/3 of those cuts focused on programs that are focused on poor and hungry people, mainly poor and hungry people in our own country. When that budget was released, the Budget Committee released report language in which they specifically talk about how to slash the international affairs budget. And part of that is to say that that Congress should eliminate Feed the Future. Eliminate Feed the Future. Because, argues the House Budget Committee, Feed the Future duplicates our food aid program. It is ill-informed. So, Michelle, I think, you can get Peter, and we need to go see those staffers to disabuse them of the notion that Feed the Future is not food aid. And Peter McPherson can talk about a gross approach to reducing poverty in the world, and this is a good Republican idea. And these guys are just misinformed. And it's problematic because Governor Romney has embraced the Ryan budget. The language is out there. At a macro level, there's a very good chance that the whole Republican Party will take this, cut everything approach to funding. And then what the House Budget Committee staff have done is to provide language that suggests very ill-informed ways of cutting international affairs spending, and in particular, wiping out what we're doing in the area of agriculture. Then the third process that we can, so I really would invite you to, I think you're in a good position, we can use Peter to organize a meeting to go see those guys, because it'll get into the platform, it'll get into Romney's rhetoric, and it's just misinformed. The third thing is the Farm Bill. This week, Chairman Stabenow and Ranking Republican Roberts released a draft of the Farm Bill in the Senate. On the issue of international food aid, it is really good. It is really good. They have proposed an expansion of local regional purchase of food aid, language that would improve the quality of the nutritional impact of food aid. There's a study that Don Payne suggested before he died, which would look at food aid, agricultural development, all the things that we're doing in the Horn of Africa, and draw the lessons from these different approaches to hunger in the Horn. It is a really good bill. So, but the food aid provisions are very much under attack. So like right now, like today or tomorrow, Stabenow and Roberts need to hear from people that you appreciate what they're doing in the area of food aid reform. If anybody here has connections to Michigan, for example, or Kansas, now's the time to let, as a citizen of Michigan or citizen of Kansas, let Senator Stabenow and Senator Roberts know that you appreciate what their draft farm bill does in the area of food aid. And then the fourth process is the process that the foreign operations subcommittees are going to go through to allocate the allocations of the foreign affairs money, what goes to development assistance, what goes to other stuff. and then within development assistance, what goes to agriculture and to feed the future and scaling up nutrition. That process is just getting started. The Senate Appropriations Committee was wonderful, led by Senator Graham and Senator Cochran. The Senate mark for foreign affairs spending is above the president's mark for foreign affairs spending. They were just remarkably good. But now that money gets divided at the subcommittee level. We expect that the House mark will be $6 billion below the Senate mark for foreign affairs. So there will be a huge divergence. But within that, probably there's nothing Kay Granger can do to change the amount of money she's got. But she can decide whether to zero out Feed the Future as the Budget Committee has recommended. It's important that she not do that. Nobody knows, but my guess is after the elections, they'll come back and they'll probably finalize appropriations for fiscal 13 in December. Some of these mega trillion-dollar issues, they're not going to be able to resolve in December. So those things may get pushed off until the next Congress. But my guess is that they'll decide just to split the difference between the Senate and the House, and they'll pass an appropriations bill for fiscal 13. So the decisions that are being made in the subcommittees on the allocation of available resources, these are decisions that are likely to have. They're not just rhetorical. They will have real consequences for the amount of money that Philly has to spend next year. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Thanks very much for that. I think it's so clear that this is an incredibly critical year. 2012 is going to be a year of so many different processes here in the U.S. I'm sure you've heard also in Europe and globally. So let's open it up for questions at this stage. Quarter after, so we've got about 15 minutes for questions. You'd identify yourself first, please. There's a microphone coming around as well, I hope, or if we find one that still has batteries that are charged.
I've got two, I think.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Rechargeable batteries are great, but
John's got a loud voice.
So I'll get my last point fast. This is for you, Julie, and it relates to the dialogue that's been going on between NGOs and USAID on defragmenting between ourselves, particularly at the country level. The NGOs really see themselves as having a key role in capacity building level capacity in the last 10 kilometers. Very end of the government and the value chain. And we're eager to improve that dialogue and improve that strategic coordination at the level. And everything you said, I entirely agree with. I wonder if you see better ways for U.S.-based international NGOs to bring that advantage on the ground to the work of USAID.
sure. Yeah, go ahead. Roy? Up here. Rachel, up here.
Yes, this is a question for Professor Gordon Conway. In your report, you mentioned the importance of anticipation, and you cited FuseNet in particular for anticipating the famine coming in the Horn of Africa. I've been associated with FuseNet for a while, so I wanted to say that I thought this was a terribly important observation, but that perhaps it didn't go far enough. Anticipation is more than just about weather. It's anticipation of, as you note with AMIS, price volatility, anticipation of how livelihoods are changing, being able to monitor malnutrition. And we have noted, for for instance, in talking to various African leaders, that they feel AMIS is not going to help them translate what the volatility of rice prices in China, how that's going to impact on banana prices in Uganda or sorghum and millet prices in Burkina Faso. So they need their own capacities to do this, to do the kind of data analysis and to better link that kind of data and information systems to local decision making and local policy processes. And as good as the FuseNet reports are, I fear that they're not read by African decision makers, both big and small. And we're thinking that information systems also have to be able to reach out to the private sector, obviously informing farmers. And this is a great place for an alliance with cell phone companies, for instance. But I just wonder that if, what you might think about that as an additional priority in your recommendation.
Good. Take one more over here, maybe?
Good morning. My name is Jerry Brown with Agricultural Results. Julie, David, and Professor, thank you very much for your comments. But I guess I'd like to take the defragmentation issue a little higher. I like to look at it as a systems issue. FuseNet, which the gentleman here just talked about, has been around for a long time. It's an excellent work and has great systems in cross-border trade analysis, meteorology, and a host of other things. For example, in the African context, FARA is doing great work in moving technology and technology information transfer across countries. However, in our program, at the program development level, why is it we as practitioners can't standardize the types of systems to be included in program project development? Why can't we say, okay, if a part of a program has to address global climate change, then why aren't we saying, let's get FuseNet and their folks around the table, let's get other regional organizations who are handling the same topics around the table, and come up with standardized language that needs to be considered in every program and project development. Instead of every time there's a new project, we get a design team, everybody wants to be creative. I think we've invested now a long time in very good technologies, very good processes, and good people. It's time, I think.
Was there one more? Howdy, did you?
Howdy Lewis from Harvest Club. Gordon, you used an example of transgenic bananas in Uganda. So my question is, how important are transgenic crops to growth with resilience? And have the political barriers come down, or do you see them coming down in the near future?
Thanks. Should we start having some response? Gordon, you want to go first?
First of all, I'm fascinated by this concern with defragmentation. I mean, it's run all the way through the meeting. I hadn't realized this was you press the button, it says, do you want to defragment your machine that does all this stuff? And clearly that's what you're gauging. And it's not a conversation that we're having in Britain, or in Europe more generally, although I think it's relevant there too. And so I want to try and look at this. And I like the way in which you pose the notion of getting down to those last 10 kilometers. How do you get that to come together? I don't have simple answers. What I do like is what Julie was talking about in Guatemala. I mean, that's one way of getting to this. And what we desperately need is to get the key donors in any particular country to be working together with the civil society and the governments themselves. There is some signs that can happen. I saw it in Malawi, for example, at one point. And that may be one approach. On the FuseNet, you're right, it's a great technology and a great system, and yet, it didn't really have the impact it should have done in the Ethiopian situation. It wasn't listened to enough. I think for this and various other inputs to African agriculture, we need to take more regional approaches. We need to look at the regional bodies like Asareka and Coraf and so on and so forth, their research bodies, that they will build up the data analysis. Many countries have not got the capacity to build up the data analysis that you're talking about. But you could get it built up within a regional organization. And those regional organizations, I think, will be increasingly listened to by political leaders. I mean, that's the only answer I've got for that. On the transgenic crops, it varies from country to country in Africa. But there are, I'm on the board of the African Agricultural Technology Foundation, and there have about 7 countries that are doing transgenic confined field trials. Uganda is way out front. Uganda is transforming over 6 different crops to about a dozen different problems. And they've got trials going on with all of these. It's cassava, it's bananas, it's rice, it's maize, it's cowpeas. No, not cowpeas, but anyway, I've forgotten which 6 they all are. But they're working on it, and you can see it. And these are young Ugandans who are doing the work, led by some older Ugandans, but there's some really good, bright young Ugandans who are in the laboratories doing the work. I think as Uganda moves forward, as Burkina Faso moves forward, we'll see a number of other countries following on. There's a lot of work still to be done in terms of the biosafety regulations and the actual basis for permissions, and in particular issues over strict liability. There's a lot of interest in stewardship, which Julie mentioned just very briefly. And I was at a meeting recently on stewardship of biotechnology in Africa. There are about 70 or 80 Africans from a large number of countries who talked about the kind of work they were doing on stewardship. It was extraordinary. I didn't have much to offer. They wanted me to do a keynote speech, and in the end, I said, I put up a picture of the Lord High Steward under Queen Elizabeth, the original Queen Elizabeth, and said that the steward was the man who managed the Queen's household, you know, her house, the household, and the estate, and made sure it was sustainable and lasted for generations. I showed a picture of him, and he got a ruff and all the rest of it. I said, that's what you've got to become. And they thought this was lovely. That was my sole contribution, because all of them had got a much better understanding of what stewardship meant in biotechnology than I've actually heard from anybody else. So I was very encouraged by that. I think things will change over the next few years.
Okay. Just a few comments. John, thank you for your question. Over the past couple of years, we've seen a shift at USAID, the new policy of USAID Forward, which is aimed at procurement reform, but I've come to think of and understand it more as about a capacity reform. And so, I mean, we've been mandated by Administrator Shah, to really work increasingly with local organizations, and not just work with them as partners of U.S. organizations, but put ourselves on a glide path where those local organizations are going to become increasingly responsible for finances, for administration, and most importantly for results. And so I agree with you 100% that the U.S. NGO community has much to offer in this quest to build local capacity. But I think the shift that needs to take place is that these are conversations that need to happen at the country level with local organizations themselves, and working out with them how will they build their capacity, and how can other organizations, such as U.S. NGOs, along with others, help them in that quest. That's the conversation that needs to happen. So that's what I have to say on that. But I think personally, I'm very proud of this policy, because coming from the NGO world. I mean, this is what we have asked for. You know, we have asked for strong local organizations. So we have to now put our shoulders into this to make it a reality. I wanted to say something, even though, Roy, this question wasn't for me on FuseNet. I wanted to respond a little bit to what you had said, Gordon. Roy knows that I believe deeply, in the need for capacity development in this area, and for it to be, in the hands of local organizations as well, this local information gathering and analysis. I do think, with the Horn of Africa this year, we've made quite a lot of progress on that score. Not so much on transferring the responsibility for information and analysis. That's still to be done. But in the sense of seeing the African Union assume increasing responsibility, and to be, they were the ones to convene governments several times, most effectively, most recently, the Nairobi Horn of Africa Conference just a couple of weeks ago. So I think that's new and that's different, and that is sort of the fruits of this long march, that we've been on with the Maputo Declaration and CAADP, and now we are seeing African Union and the regional economic communities, but with African Union push stepping forward. So I think it is appropriate for us to look at, how do we begin strengthening these capacities in that framework, but realizing that an enormous shift has already taken place. Finally, Jerry, thank you for your vocalizing the frustration, on defragmentation, and I'm happy to know that it's a buzzword, at least in this room. I think it's a lot to do with the institutional incentives that we as donors, we as agencies, put in. We reward bureaus for demonstrating their, I can say this is still a sort of semi-outsider, we reward bureaus for demonstrating their singular accomplishments. They don't reward us for saying how well we collaborated with EGAT or how well we collaborated with DACHA. We're really trying to upset that a little bit with Feed the Future. So I think we have an opportunity through, the Global Health Initiative, through Feed the Future, to demonstrate, that we can't afford, essentially, to design new and creative and wonderful and project-specific mechanisms in every case. So I think, we are charged with modeling good behavior across agencies, across USAID, and across the U.S. government. I do think we have an opportunity in both the G8 and G20, and an opportunity for you all, to help reinforce this discussion. Because in the discussions that I've been in with the technical working groups for the G8, the clarion cry is no new institutions, no new organizations, use what we have better. So we now need to push and say, well, what does that look like at country level? What will you give up, U.S.? What will you stop doing, DFID, so that we can have a common approach to achieve the result that we all say we're committed to? So I think it's in how we frame the results. You get rewarded not for setting up, a new system, but you're rewarded for doing what it takes to get the sustainable result that we want. Howie, so thanks for your remark. Also, I think Gordon's right. We're also seeing a shift in Africa in several countries. In Tanzania, at the launch of our Sustainable Intensification Workshop, we were all surprised, to hear that the Minister of Agriculture opened that conference with me, and we were not expecting. Tanzania has been kind of one of the worrisome holdouts on GM. The minister stood by me and said, it's been difficult for us to use biotechnology or to think about it here in Tanzania. It's been politically difficult. We've allowed our universities to work with it, but we haven't seen our way through to policy change. He said, climate change is going to make us change in that regard. And we all gasped, yeah? What does that mean? So he said, we're going to start now. We're going to start with BT cotton, and we're going to progress from there. And I asked him afterwards, I said, and the president, this is coming from the president, he said, the president agrees with me. He said, I want you to ask him yourself, and I'm going to set up a meeting for you to talk with the president about this. And so he did. And the president did exactly reaffirm those words. So I think we're coming to it because of our collective efforts in this and political will at the country level. We're starting to see these kind of breakthroughs. David?
Well, I really liked what Julie said about using local capacity. It ties in with Gordon's introduction with the remarkable development that's happened in Africa, which is, I'm a preacher, so I see this as, God moving in our history. But it does mean that things are different and that some African institutions are much stronger than they were even 10 years ago. And so there are new opportunities for all of us to work with Africans in new ways. And then on the topic of defragmentation, I just want to ask a couple of questions. How many of you have the May 17th meeting on your calendars now? The May 17th meeting, the Chicago Council meeting? Oh, I thought you'd all have it on your. So some.
That's the May 18th.
I'm sorry, I apologize. How many of you have the May 18th meeting, the Chicago Council meeting on your calendar now? So I thought it'd be everybody. Okay, and then May 17th meeting, how many folks have that on your calendar, the one on nutrition? One. Okay, so I think the May 18th meeting is going to be really good. You ought to put it on your calendar. But then, can I have any takers? How many additional people will put the May 17th meeting on their calendar to come and learn about nutrition and push for that? All right. We're getting some defragmentation right here. Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
David. Being respectful of everyone's time, let's not take any more questions from the floor, but I'm sure that if people want to talk with anyone separately, we can do that. But thank you very much for coming, and thank you, Gordon, for coming. Thanks, David. Different issues.
Yeah, no, you do. Yeah,
you get a good flavor.
That's right. The big issue is in Nairobi was how you use finance. Really big issue. The other one is about practicality. How do you actually get things practical? Hi, Mark. How are you?
How are you?
It's nice of you to come.
Just come and say hi. You're going to be very busy. Everyone wants to talk to you.
Yeah, but